The Galactic Council chamber was designed to intimidate. Vaulted ceilings stretched so high that sound became uncertain. The floor reflected light in ways that made you question if you were standing on anything solid at all. Rows of representatives from 43 species arranged themselves in concentric circles, each position determined by ancient protocol, each species certain of their place in the hierarchy of the known universe. Earth had one seat, a small one set in the outer ring. Chen sat in that seat and said nothing. The vote had been called for the morning session, but the truth was that the decision had been made weeks ago, perhaps months. She could feel it in the way the other representatives avoided looking at Earth's section. She could hear it in the careful formality of every announcement, the way bureaucrats shift towards ceremony when they have already chosen the ending. The Core Collective's representative stood first. His exoskeleton caught the chamber light in fragments, breaking it into pieces. He had been waiting for this moment. Chen could tell because his antennae didn't twitch with the usual nervous energy. They held still, predatory. Earth, he said, and the word fell into the chamber like something heavy, has systematically violated the principles of the coalition. Human traders undercut our mineral prices. Human diplomats negotiate with unnatural patience, creating trade agreements that benefit only themselves. Human populations expand without respect for population protocols. They breed as though the galaxy has infinite space. They consume resources at rates that destabilize markets. They show no proper respect for established hierarchies. Chen wrote something in her notebook, not notes about what he said. She was calculating supply chain redundancies. The Vane Federation's representative spoke next, then the Lithian Empire, then 7 others. The accusations were rehearsed. They were also true. Humans did undercut prices. Humans were patient in ways that made other species uncomfortable. Humans did have higher birth rates. Humans did not care much about hierarchies that didn't serve them. What none of these representatives seemed to understand was that none of these things were weaknesses. They were the only reason Earth was still in the room at all. Chen had been a cargo logistics officer for 17 years before being assigned to the council. She had never asked for this position, but Earth had sent her anyway, which meant Earth had reasons. Earth always had reasons. The vote was called. The electronic panels lit up in sequence. 43 species, 43 votes, all of them the same color. Expulsion. 1 species abstained. The Keth Collective, who rarely spoke and rarely voted. They were the builders of the council itself, thousands of years ago, and they maintained a kind of detached dignity about galactic politics. Even their abstention was a statement. It was not a defense of Earth. It was simply a refusal to participate in the celebration. The Core Collective's representative was already on his feet. Speeches of victory began. Other species sent messages of gratitude. The Vaughns sent a case of rare minerals as a gift, a down payment on improved relations now that the human problem had been handled. The Sethri gifted technology schematics. Everyone was throwing something at the council's feet, like animals dropping kills at the feet of a dominant predator. Chen closed her notebook. She stood. The chamber fell into the kind of silence that happens before something breaks. She walked to the center of the chamber. No one had asked her to speak. She had no right to speak. But she walked to the center anyway, and because she moved with absolute certainty, because she carried herself like she belonged there, no one stopped her. "Thank you for your decision," she said. Her voice was quiet. The chamber's acoustics were designed to amplify sound, so every word reached every representative clearly. "We appreciate the clarity. We will comply with the vote immediately." She turned. She walked back to Earth's seat. She gathered her personal items. They were few. 1 notebook, 1 communications device, 1 small data crystal that contained nothing important. "1 question," the Core Collective's representative called out, and there was surprise in his voice, surprise that Chen had not begged or argued or made demands. "Will you petition for reconsideration?" Chen paused at Earth section. She looked back at him. "No," she said, "we won't." She walked out of the chamber. Behind her, she could hear the confused murmuring beginning. Species did not accept expulsion gracefully. Species fought. Species raged. Species demanded justice or negotiation or at least some performance of disagreement. Species did not simply walk away. But Earth was not like other species. Her communication device activated as she entered the corridor. A message from Earth Orbital Command. 3 words: begin Phase 3. Chen had known this was coming. She had known since the moment Earth had assigned her to the Council position. She had known since she had first read the trade agreements that humans had spent 70 years embedding into the infrastructure of the galaxy, like roots growing silently through the foundations of a building. Most people never noticed roots until the building collapsed. She stopped at a viewport. Beyond it, the stars stretched in their ancient patterns. Somewhere in that vast darkness was Earth, a small planet, an unimportant planet by most measures, a world that had been fighting for survival since the moment humans landed on it, fighting against gravity and weather and the simple fact of scarcity. Humans were not patient creatures naturally. They had learned patience because they had to, because the universe had never given them anything, because they had been forced to build everything themselves, to create every advantage, to plan so far ahead that their own lives would be empty by the time their plans came to fruition. The galaxy had just voted to ban Earth from the coalition. The galaxy thought this was a victory. The galaxy had no idea what was about to happen. Chen turned away from the viewport. She had a transport to catch. She had documents to deliver. She had systems to dismantle. Not with weapons, with paperwork. Not with armies. With the simple revelation that Earth had spent 70 years becoming essential to the survival of every species that had just voted against it. Somewhere in the darkness behind her, the core collective's mining operations were beginning their first equipment failures. The Vane Federation's supply ships were receiving routing updates that would send them through systems that no longer recognized their credentials. The Lithian Empire's medical networks were about to discover that their primary power distribution system was managed by a human company, buried so deep in their infrastructure that removing it would require rebuilding everything. The vote had been this morning. By tonight, the universe would begin to understand what it had done. And by the time the panic set in, it would be far too late to stop Phase 3. Chen walked through the corridors of the Galactic Council, and no one tried to stop her. No one dared, because she was no longer just one woman walking through a hallway. She was the beginning of something the galaxy had not seen coming. She was the answer to a question the universe had not yet learned to ask. Behind her, the council chamber emptied as representatives began receiving the first emergency alerts. Somewhere, a core miner was staring at an inert excavation unit. Somewhere, a Vane logistics coordinator was trying to reroute a shipment that no longer existed in the system. Somewhere, a Lithian doctor was watching their life support systems flicker. And on Earth, in command centers that the galaxy did not know existed, humans were beginning Phase 3. The vote was over. The real work was just beginning. 3 weeks of silence from Earth. That was what broke the confidence of the Galactic Council. Not threats, not demands, not even a communication of protest. Just nothing. A void where a response should have been. The core collective's mining operation on Karath 7 had stopped producing output on day 3. The equipment was functional. The miners were not injured. The facilities were not damaged. But the ore that should have been extracted was not moving. The conveyor systems had rerouted themselves. The sorting machinery had changed its programming overnight. It was as if the entire operation had decided to take a vacation. The Corps sent a technical team. The team discovered that every single control interface on the planet had been locked with encryption keys that could not be cracked. Every command returned the same message. System requires authorization from human administrative override. There was no human administrator on the planet. There had never been one officially listed. But when the Corps dug deeper into their records, they found him. Engineer Marcus Chen, posted to Kareth 17 years ago, listed as a consultant for quality assurance. His contract was buried in subsection 14 of a mining agreement that the Corps Collective had signed in a time so distant that none of the current leadership remembered it. The most damning detail: his contract specified that he had authority over all systems he had designed or integrated. He had designed every system. He had integrated all of them, which meant that technically, legally, Marcus Chen had authority over the entire mining operation. And Marcus Chen was human. The Vein Federation discovered their supply routing problem on day 4. Shipments of manufactured goods were not reaching their destinations. They were not being lost in transit. They were arriving at completely different locations. A container of atmospheric processors meant for the Vein's border stations was delivered to a Keth Collective warehouse on the other side of known space. A shipment of quantum components vanished into a logistics node that did not officially exist. When the Vein investigated, they traced the problem to the central routing hub. The hub was managed by human contractors. It had been managed by human contractors for so long that the Vein had stopped thinking of it as a separate entity. It was just part of their supply chain, the way a heart is part of a body. The human contractors had simply stopped moving Vein shipments to Vein locations, which was not quite a violation of their contract, because their contract specified that they would manage routing in accordance with approved protocols. And the protocols, it turned out, had been updated by someone with authorization codes that traced back to an Earth signature so old that the digital encryption looked like ancient writing. The Lithian Empire's medical disaster was worse because it was faster. Their primary power distribution network went dark for exactly 12 minutes on day 5, just long enough for an independent audit. The audit revealed that their entire system was dependent on a maintenance contract held by a human engineering firm called Stellar Operations. Stellar Operations had been founded 83 years ago, during the time when the Lithian Empire was emerging from a period of internal conflict and had been desperate for any technical assistance. Stellar Operations had maintained the system so well that the Lithian Empire had forgotten it was external. The company was as much a part of their infrastructure as their own government. When the Lithian tried to contact Stellar Operations and demand that they restore full power, they received a response. It came from a human woman named Dr. Sarah Okonkwo, who had been the managing director for the past 4 years. Your contract with Stellar Operations requires coalition membership in good standing, Dr. Okonkwo said in her message. Earth has been expelled from the coalition. We are no longer in good standing with any entity that requires coalition membership. Our contract is therefore suspended. We will be removing all human personnel and equipment from Lithian space within the month. The Lithian Empire did the mathematics. Removing Stellar Operations would require rebuilding 70% of their power infrastructure from scratch. It would take years. It would cost more than their annual military budget. It would leave them vulnerable to every species with the ambition to expand. They could not afford to lose Stellar Operations. The panic began slowly, then it became universal. The Corps Collective sent emergency communications to every other species. Earth had infiltrated our infrastructure. The Vein Federation sent out warnings about supply chain manipulation. The Lithian Empire broadcast a desperate call for help, for anyone who could understand what Earth was doing. The Galactic Council called an emergency session on day 21. Chen watched the broadcast from a small habitation module on Kareth 7, where she had taken up residence the morning Earth was expelled. She was not there officially. She had no title. She had no authority to be anywhere, but no one tried to force her to leave, because removing her would require understanding the systems that now surrounded her. The council chamber was in chaos. Species shouted over each other. Accusations flew. Someone demanded that Earth be invaded. Someone else pointed out that they could not afford the military loss if it meant losing supply lines. It was the kind of argument that only happened when everyone was losing at the same time. Then the core collective's representative did something intelligent. He called for direct communication with Earth. It took 4 hours for the connection to be established. When Chen's face appeared on the council's communication screens, she was not in any official chamber. She was sitting in a mining facility, covered in dust, wearing work clothes. Earth has violated the expulsion order, the core representative said. You are conducting operations in coalition space. Chen smiled very slightly. We are not conducting operations, she said. We are maintaining systems that we legally own and operate. We are complying with all contracts. We are not interfering with coalition members. We are simply running the services we contracted to run 70 years ago. If those services are no longer required, we can terminate them. It would only take a few months to dismantle everything. The representative's exoskeleton rippled with agitation. You are holding our infrastructure hostage. No, Chen said. We are maintaining the infrastructure we were paid to maintain. What you do with that information is your choice. We are simply pointing out that expelling us from the coalition does not erase the contracts that exist outside the coalition. We will honor those contracts. We will maintain the systems, but we will not do it for free, and we will not do it for a coalition that has expelled us. She disconnected. The silence in the council chamber was the kind that happens after an avalanche. Not peaceful, just broken. The Vane Federation made a proposal within the hour. Reinstate Earth to coalition membership immediately. The Lithian Empire seconded it. The Keth Collective abstained again, which was somehow more damning than any vote. The Core Collective, who had pushed hardest for expulsion, could not afford to vote no. Their minds were dark. Their economy was collapsing. They had no choice. Earth was reinstated to the coalition, with all previous rights restored. Then Chen sent another message. This one went directly to the leadership of the Core Collective, the Vane Federation, and the Lithian Empire. The message was very simple. That was only Phase 3, it said. We haven't started negotiating yet. In the spaces of the galaxy, where no one was watching, human engineers smiled. They had been waiting for this moment since the day the vote was called. They had been waiting for the universe to understand what it meant to depend on something it could not control. The real work was about to begin. The negotiation table was set in neutral space, on a station that orbited no planet and belonged to no single species. The Keth had built it centuries ago as a place for difficult conversations. It was fitting, Chen thought, that this conversation would happen here. She sat alone on one side of the table. 20 representatives sat on the other side. They had all come. The Core Collective, the Vane Federation, the Lithian Empire, and 17 others, the entire core of the Galactic Council. They had brought with them their best negotiators, their economists, their strategic advisors. They had brought everything they could think of. They had still come unprepared. Earth is willing to restore all systems, Chen said. She had a small notebook in front of her. She did not need it. She had memorized every term, every condition, every possible negotiating point. But she held it anyway because it made her look less dangerous, less like she had planned this from the beginning. Less like every step of this dance had been choreographed 70 years ago. We will restore your infrastructure to full operational capacity, all services, all systems, all dependencies. The Vane representative leaned forward. He was young for his species, only 300 years old, which meant he had not lived through the period when humans had been embedded into their supply chains. What do you want? He asked. Chen opened her notebook. She turned a page very deliberately. She took her time. She let them sit with uncertainty. Exclusive salvage rights, she said finally. to any technology, any equipment, any materials that the coalition designates as disposed, for the next 100 years. The response was instant. Outrage. The core representative was on his feet. The Lithian Empire's leader was shouting. The vein was trying to calculate what this meant, and the calculation was clearly producing results that frightened him. That is unacceptable, the core said. Those are resources that belong to the coalition. They belong to whoever picks them up, Chen said. She was still looking at her notebook, still calm, still unhurried. If they are disposed, they are trash. If they are trash, why do you care who takes them? Because those materials have value, the vein said. The young species was learning quickly. Exactly, Chen said. Which is why you should be giving them to us for free, rather than the coalition spending resources to store or destroy them. She turned a page in her notebook. Second condition. First refusal on all new trade routes. Any trade route opening in coalition space, Earth has the right to establish a trading post. Any trade agreement negotiated between coalition members, Earth has the right to match any offered terms and establish commerce. That will destroy our trade monopolies, someone said from the back of the room. Yes, Chen agreed. It will create actual competition, which means your prices will be fair and your services will be excellent. Everyone wins. Earth wins most, the core representative said bitterly. Earth survives, Chen corrected. Earth learns what it means to be outside a system it can no longer trust. So yes, we build redundancy, we build independence, we build security. What you call winning, we call not being expelled again. She turned another page. Third condition, settlement rights on 5 contested planets, full autonomous human colonies, no coalition oversight, no restrictions on resource extraction, population growth, or development. This caused different chaos. The contested planets were valuable. They were valuable because they were not owned by any single species, which meant every species wanted them. Giving them to humanity meant giving up leverage that the coalition had spent centuries maintaining. You ask for too much, the Lithian Empire's leader said. This was not an accusation. It was a statement of fact. It was also a negotiating position. It was saying, we will not accept this, but we are still listening. Chen closed her notebook. I ask for what humanity requires to trust the coalition again, she said. You expelled us. You expelled us based on accusations that were true. Humans do undercut your prices. Humans are patient in ways you find uncomfortable. Humans breed faster than you expect. You were not wrong to be afraid, but you were wrong to think you could afford to be afraid. She stood up. You have 48 hours to accept these terms. If you do not, then on day 1 every human system goes offline, simultaneously. Not your mining operations, not your supply routes, your life support, your water purification, your power grids, your medical networks. You would kill thousands, the vain representative said. He was truly young, Chen thought. He did not understand that she had already made this calculation, that she carried it with her like a weight. You killed billions when you decided to fight climate change too late, Chen said. You killed millions when you decided your profit margins mattered more than species stability. You killed thousands when you voted to ban us. Don't tell me about death as though I should be ashamed of it. I am simply being honest about consequences. She moved toward the door. 48 hours, she said again. She left them in that neutral chamber, and behind her, she could hear the panic starting. Species shouting at species. Negotiators running calculations that all returned the same terrifying result. They could not afford to call her bluff because they could not be certain it was a bluff. By hour 36, the core collective had sent an emergency proposal. By hour 40, the Vain Federation had conceded to all 3 conditions. By hour 45, the Lithian Empire had added a 4th concession, trade priority status in their market, which was worth billions in annual revenue. Chen accepted everything without negotiation. She had already won the moment they sat down at the table. The real victory would come later, when they realized that humanity did not need the Galactic Council. The real victory would come when they understood that Earth had planned this expulsion, had orchestrated this moment, had built the entire trap with careful hands over decades. But that was a lesson they would learn slowly. For now, they had agreed to give humanity what it needed to survive alone, which meant they had also agreed to create the conditions for humanity to eventually not need them at all. Chen signed the agreement in a chamber that smelled like ozone and desperation. The other representatives signed it with hands that trembled slightly. They had been outmaneuvered so completely that they were still discovering new ways in which they had lost. The Keth representative, who had abstained on every vote, approached Chen as she was leaving. "You planned this," the Keth said. "It was not a question." "My species learned patience," Chen said, "because the universe taught us that we could not afford to be impatient. We learned strategy because we had no other option. We learned to build things so essential that removing us would mean removing ourselves." "You will surpass us," the Keth said. "No," Chen said, "we will simply become necessary. That is enough." She left the chamber. Behind her, the Galactic Council began the work of telling their people that they had been conquered by a species that had never fired a shot. Conquered by paperwork and patience, and the slow realization that infrastructure was the truest form of power. The universe had voted to ban Earth. Earth had simply chosen to use that vote as the beginning of something better. The settlement on the first of the 5 contested planets was already being constructed. Thousands of humans were already landing, building, planting, starting something new. By the time the Galactic Council understood what they had done, it would be far too late to take it back. Earth was no longer just a member of the coalition. Earth was its foundation. And foundations do not compromise. The human engineers arrived with the quiet efficiency of professionals who had done this work 1,000 times before. They moved through the systems like surgeons, replacing components that had worked for decades with new technology that worked better, faster, more reliable, more human. Marcus Chen stood in the Karath 7 mining facility and watched his team integrate the new system into the old infrastructure. It took 3 weeks. By the end of those 3 weeks, the mining operation was producing at 130% of its previous capacity. The core collective workers stared at the output numbers as though they did not believe their own equipment. "How?" a core engineer asked. His antennae were still with confusion. "Better planning," Marcus said. He was old now, older than most humans who worked off-world. His hands had performed the same motions so many times that they moved with the precision of machinery. Better resource allocation, better integration between systems. We just optimized it. What he did not say was that humans had been studying core mining operations for 70 years. What he did not say was that every adjustment had been calculated decades in advance, waiting for the moment when humans would be allowed to return and implement them. What he did not say was that this facility would now produce enough resources to fund human expansion for the next 50 years. The core did not need to know those things. They only needed to see the numbers, only needed to understand that their operation was better with humans running the optimizations, only needed to become so dependent on improved output that the thought of removing human engineers became impossible. Across known space, the same work was happening. The Vane Federation supply routes now moved cargo with a speed that would have been impossible before. Late deliveries became early deliveries. Lost shipments became mythical stories. The efficiency was so extreme that other species began requesting human contractors for their own supply chains. The Lithian Empire's power grid became the most stable in known space. They had not had a single catastrophic failure in 93 days. The average before humans had optimized the system was one major failure every 17 days. Thousands of lives that had been spent in the dark, in danger, in vulnerability. Now, those thousands of lives had light. They had security. They had the gift of infrastructure that did not fail. And everywhere they looked, they saw human engineers, human maintenance crews, human technicians, humans who had become as essential to the functioning of the galaxy as blood was to a body. Dr. Sarah Okonkwo stood in the command center of the Lithian power grid and watched the telemetry streams flow across her displays. Every system was optimal. Every system was running within the parameters she had calculated. Every system would continue to run for the next 100 years if the maintenance protocols were followed exactly as she had designed them. Which they would be, because no one wanted to discover what happened if those protocols failed. A young Lithian approached her. She was a technician, maybe 300 years into her career. Young, by Lithian standards. She had never known a time when stellar operations was not part of their infrastructure. Dr. Okonkwo, the Lithian said, there is something I do not understand. What is that? Sarah asked. She had been asked this question by 100 different species in 100 different ways. She had learned to answer it with patience. You could have asked for more, the Lithian said. When Earth was expelled, when we needed you, you could have asked for everything. You could have owned us. Why did you not? Sarah turned away from the displays. She looked at the young Lithian for a long moment. Because we do not need to own you, she said finally. Ownership requires maintenance. It requires enforcement. It requires constant vigilance against rebellion. We do not need that. We only need to be necessary, and we are necessary now. That is more powerful than ownership. You will give us everything because you cannot afford to lose us. That is the difference. We are not your rulers. We are your foundation. The Lithian did not look comforted by this explanation. 5 years passed. The human settlements on the contested planets had grown from small outposts to thriving cities. The population had doubled twice. The infrastructure was expanding faster than anyone had predicted. Humans were breeding, and this time, no one was trying to stop them. The fear that had driven the expulsion vote had been replaced with something more complex: recognition, dependence, the dawning understanding that humanity had not been trying to take over the galaxy. Humanity had simply been trying to survive it. Chen stood on a terrace of the primary settlement on Karath 9, the largest of the 5 contested planets. She could see the city spreading out below her, built by human hands and human ingenuity. There were other species here too, core workers who had come for better wages, vain technicians drawn by the infrastructure that actually worked, Lithian families seeking a place where the power grid never failed. A core collective engineer approached her. She had seen him many times before. His name was something unpronounceable in human language, so she had started thinking of him as Krell, and he seemed to accept this. Why did you not fight? Krell asked. His antennae were careful, curious rather than hostile. Chen did not ask him to specify what fight he meant. She had been waiting for someone to ask this question. Because fighting is temporary, she said. We learned this a long time ago. Every war has a victor and a defeated, but every victor eventually becomes vulnerable to the next threat. We did not want to be the victor. We wanted to be the foundation, and you cannot defeat a foundation without destroying everything built on top of it. You did not know we would need you so desperately, Krell said. No, Chen agreed. We only suspected. We built the infrastructure and hoped. We optimized the systems and believed, but we did not know. That is what patience means. It means doing the work and accepting that you might never see the result. And now, Krell asked. Now we see the result, Chen said. She pointed to the city below them. It was beautiful in a functional way. No unnecessary decoration. No wasteful design. Just buildings and systems and infrastructure that worked. Just humans living alongside other species, all of them dependent on the foundation that humanity had built. "This is not a victory," she said. "This is survival, and survival is the most honest goal any species can have." Krell did not respond. He simply stood beside her and looked at the city. After a while, he left. Chen remained, watching the city that would not exist without humanity's patience, without Earth's long game, without the willingness to be expelled and use that expulsion as the beginning of something better. In a command center on Karath 7, the other human engineers were celebrating a small milestone. The mining operation had reached production numbers that were 300% above pre-optimization levels. They were talking about expansion, about building new facilities, about establishing permanent settlements. But Chen was not thinking about expansion. She was thinking about 5 years from now, 10 years, 100 years, a time when humans would walk among the stars not as members of a coalition, but as something more fundamental, something that could not be removed, something that had become part of the galaxy itself. That was the victory humanity wanted. Not domination, just the quiet knowledge that the universe could not function without them. In the darkness of space, human ships were being built, not weapons, infrastructure, transport vessels designed to move materials, communication arrays designed to connect systems, power generation facilities designed to support more life than anyone had thought possible. The universe had voted to ban Earth. Earth had simply used that vote as permission to build something unstoppable. And the worst part, Chen thought, was that no one was even angry about it anymore. They were just grateful. That was worse than any war. A child was born on Karath 9, and her name was Maya, which meant nothing to the Quor or the Vane or the Lithian or any of the other species that had come to build lives on this planet. But her parents had been born on Earth, and for them, the name carried weight. It carried memory. It carried the knowledge of a world that this child would never see. Maya had never breathed Earth air. She had never felt rain that was not controlled by a water reclamation system. She had never known a sky that was not built by human engineering. Earth was a story to her, a place her grandparents came from, a promise that someday she might visit. But likely she would not. Because there was no need. Everything humanity needed was here now. Dr. Sarah Okonkwo stood in the nursery where Maya slept in a human-designed crib beneath a human-designed environmental control system. She was old now, older than she had thought it was possible to be. Her hands shook sometimes. Her mind occasionally wandered to moments she would never see again. But she was content. "She is beautiful," a core voice said behind her. Krell, the engineer who had become something like a friend over these long years. The lines between species had blurred so much now that no one thought to draw them anymore. "She is," Sarah agreed. "She will grow up here. She will never know the fear of expulsion, never know the terror of belonging to a species that the galaxy did not want. She will only know a world where humans are essential, where we are needed, where we are home." "You will not see what she becomes," Krell said. "It was not unkind, it was observation." "No," Sarah said. "I will not, but that is acceptable. She will build something, she will contribute something. That is enough." The transmission came from the Galactic Council exactly 1 week later, an official request, a formal proposition. They wanted humanity to take a permanent seat in the council chambers, not as observers, not as consultants, as full members, as participants in the decision-making that would shape the future of the galaxy. Chen received the transmission in her office, in a building that looked like human architecture but incorporated Vane efficiency protocols and Lithian design philosophy. Everything was integrated now. Everything was mixed. Everything worked because no one species tried to dominate the others anymore. She deleted the message without responding. The transmission arrived again, slightly more urgent. She deleted that one too. By the third transmission, the Galactic Council had realized what she was doing. The fourth message was different. It came directly from the Council's High Speaker, a position that rotated between the most respected representatives of the major species. Earth, it said, we ask you to consider, your place is no longer in question, your value is undeniable, come back to the table. Help us build a better future. Chen sat in her office and read the message 4 times. She thought about the young lithium technician who had asked her why humans did not ask for more. She thought about the core collective miners who now produced more than any mining operation in known space. She thought about the Vein Federation's supply routes running on time. She thought about the power grids and the medical networks and the life support systems that kept billions of beings alive. All of them running because humanity had built them. All of them necessary. All of them in the hands of humans, who could remove them at any moment. She began to write a response. Then she stopped. She deleted it. She began again, deleted again. Finally, she simply typed 2 sentences. Earth appreciates the offer. Earth declines. She sent it. The response came within hours. The Council was confused. Earth had fought for membership. Earth had demanded integration. Why would humanity refuse the very thing it had demanded? Chen did not respond to the confusion. She simply continued her work. There were new infrastructure projects to oversee. The communications network that connected all 5 human settlements needed expansion. The power generation facilities needed optimization. The water purification systems needed maintenance. There was always work. There was always something to build. That was the human nature. That was what the galaxy had never understood. Humans did not want to rule. Humans wanted to build. Humans wanted to create things that other beings could depend on. That was the satisfaction. That was the reward. 3 months later, a core economist published a paper. It was titled, "The Voluntary Infrastructure: Why Earth Chose Independence Over Authority." The paper argued that humanity had deliberately refused the Council seat because power in the Council meant accountability. It meant debate. It meant compromise. But power over infrastructure meant none of those things. Control over the systems that kept the galaxy functioning meant that humanity could make unilateral decisions. It meant that humanity could withstand any political pressure, because if the Council disagreed with an Earth decision, the Council could simply suffer the consequences, could simply watch its power grids flicker, could simply experience the failure of its supply routes. The paper became required reading in every university in known space. The Council did not respond to the analysis, but they began to understand. They had created a monster, not through hatred, but through necessity. They had created a species that they could not live without, and then they had given that species every reason to remain independent. On Karath 9, humans continued to build. The cities grew. The population expanded. Humanity spread across the 5 contested planets like roots through soil, like vines through a structure, like something essential to the very foundation of existence. And in the command centers, in the engineering facilities, in the offices where decisions were made, humans moved forward with the knowledge that they had won something more valuable than any throne. They had won the knowledge that they were necessary. Chen walked through the city one evening, watching the lights come on as the sun set. Billions of lights, all of them powered by human engineering, all of them dependent on human maintenance, all of them proof that humanity had achieved what every species dreamed of. Survival security, the knowledge that tomorrow would come. A young human approached her, probably a second-generation colonist, someone born on the contested planets who had never lived under coalition rule. "Director Chen," the young human said, "there is news from Earth. The population has doubled again. They are asking for permission to establish new settlements, to expand into new systems." Chen smiled. "Give them permission," she said. "There is no one to ask. We do not need the coalition's approval anymore." The young human looked confused. But the council... The council is a convenience, Chen said. We remain in communication because it is easier to coordinate with the galaxy when the galaxy is organized. But we do not need their permission. We never did. We only pretended we did until we understood what we were building. She looked back at the city, at the lights spreading across the landscape like a living thing. Humanity was always going to reach the stars, she said. It just took being expelled to make us understand that we could do it better alone. That night Chen recorded a message. It was not for the council. It was for the future. For the humans who would be born 100 years from now, on planets that did not yet exist, in cities that had not yet been built. This is for those who come after, she said. This is the story of the day when the galaxy voted to ban Earth. This is the story of how that vote became our greatest victory, not because we conquered, not because we dominated, but because we became necessary, because we built things so good, so reliable, so essential, that no one would ever want to remove us again. This is the story of how patience became power, how strategy became survival, how humanity learned that the truest victory is not in the throne but in the foundation. Keep building, keep expanding, keep becoming more necessary. That is our path. That is our strength. That is who we are. She ended the recording. In the darkness of space, human ships were launching, not weapons, infrastructure, materials for new settlements, technology for new systems, everything needed to spread, to grow, to build. The universe had voted to ban Earth. Earth had simply smiled and gotten to work. And the smile, in the end, was the only victory that mattered.